So I want to sort of recap from Monday. We talked about the different kinds of primaries. Somebody remind me, what is the objective of a primary? To elect who we're electing, to pick the candidate to represent our party, to choose who's going to run in the general election. All of those are accurate answers. There are two kinds of primaries. One of them is an open primary, and the other is a good job with the opposites in Sesame Street. You guys are right up there. So we've got open and closed primaries. In which kind of primary can you vote in the primary of your choice? In an open primary. In a closed primary, what do you have to do? You have to register with that party. Those of you who just said the word register, I want you to make sure that you commit to your memory that you can't just write the word register, because everybody has to register to vote. But you do, if for a closed primary, you have to register with a party before you can vote in those primaries. So that's going to be an important distinction. Then, of course, there is a third way. Well, there are other ways. There's blanket primaries, and there's top two primaries, and so on and so forth. But there is a third basic way for parties to choose their candidates. And by the way, who controls this process? Who decides how the state's primaries or caucuses are going to be run? The party themselves, right? The individual parties are the ones doing all of the deciding here. In fact, in the county where I grew up, the Democratic primary and the Republican primary were in two separate places. Like here in Brazos County on primary day, you just go to any polling place, and both the Democrat and Republican parties will be there. But where I grew up, you had to go to a different building in order to vote into the different primary that you wanted to choose. So again, the parties are going to be running the show. So sometimes parties choose something called caucuses, which if you are a nerd like me, sounds like the coolest thing ever. Because here's how it works. You show up on election day, usually it's like 7 o'clock at night, and first you check in and then they make sure that you're like a registered voter and that you meet all the criteria and all this business. And then they give you either a sticker or a special card, that shows like you count. Because for example, I could bring Nate with me, right? And they're not going to or if I was your parents, I could bring like my high school student with me, and you're allowed to come, but you just can't vote unless you're eligible to vote, right? So, so you don't get a special card or a sticker. But anyway, you get your special sticker or your special card, and you go in. And the first thing they do is they have a roll call vote, which doesn't mean anything except for it eliminates those super unimportant candidates. So like this year, with the 19 Republican candidates, in the roll call vote, we would probably find out that there wasn't enough support in our little area for, I don't know, Jim Gilmore and Bobby Jindal and Rick Santorum or whatever, people who literally got like less than 100 votes before they dropped out or something. So we would first have this roll call vote to decide like who are the areas, which candidates have major support in our area. And let's say we get it down to like 5, where there's plenty of support for these top big 5 candidates. So then we have open caucusing, where for, I don't know, half an hour or so, people are just wandering around this gymnasium or this community center and then talking to each other, and they're saying, hey, you gotta vote for this guy, or don't you want to come over here? What do you care about? Well, guess what? My guy is totally good about that thing that you care about. You just keep going. And then eventually, as time goes on and we get closer to the end of the caucus period, you have to physically align yourself around the room. There'll be signs that will be set up. You physically align yourself. So they say, okay, everybody move. And then you'll go physically to where your candidate is, and you're physically trying to get people to walk across the room to come stand with you. And then they count again. And if there are candidates that have significantly less support, then maybe there's 3 candidates that have most of the support, and then just a few people at each of the, let's say, remaining 2. Well, then they'll do a second round. And so they'll get rid of the last 2 candidates and say, okay, guys, you got to find someone else. And they'll caucus again. And everybody's talking, and of course you're trying to convince the people who were at, I don't know, Rubio and Kasich's tables, are trying to get them onto your side. But additionally, I'm trying to convince Cruz supporters to come to the Trump camp, or Trump supporters to come to the, I don't know, the Kasich camp, or whatever I'm doing. You're trying to get them to move, because guess what? Was your first vote binding? Was your second, when you had to move the sides the first time, was that binding? No, none of those things are binding. So then you're just trying to get people to come to your side. There's a cool video that I used to show, but instead of watching the video, we're going to be doing election stuff. Where like they go in the bathrooms and try to find people. Like you gotta come. We need more people for our side. So you get people to your side, and then they do the final count, and then they assign their delegates proportionally. They say, okay, well, Trump got 50% of our, caucus goers, so we're going to get him 50% of our delegates, and Cruz is going to get 30%, and whatever, Kasich is going to get 20% or whatever it was. So that's how caucuses work, which sounds awesome for me, but the downside is that it takes forever. This is not a 5-minute commitment like going to vote in a primary, where you walk in, get your ballot, mark your choice, and then leave. This is going to take several hours. You have to be there for a longer time. You have to be well versed enough in politics to be able to discuss with people, like to feel, comfortable in this environment. You have to care about politics enough to show up at 7 o'clock at night, and be there for 2 hours. So all of those things. So what do you think turnout looks like in caucuses compared to primaries? Right, even lower, right? And what is the result? How do we? What is the relationship between turnout and ideology?
Very strong.
Right, the more radical members of either party are the ones who are going to turn out. So the conservativist conservatives and the super liberalist liberals, those are the ones who are going to show up to caucus. It's like Yelp reviews, right? If you feel, if you have a rat in your food, you're going to go and write a Yelp review. Or if they gave you a free birthday cake, you're going to write a Yelp review. Otherwise, you're just like, well, whatever. You're probably going to skip the process. And the result is, of course, that candidates have to appeal to radical people in order to get to be successful in the primaries or in the caucuses. And that's going to impact the kinds of candidates that we get. One of the things that is pretty common is to see candidates shift back towards more moderate positions in the general election. So they're pretty extreme throughout the primaries, and then when they move towards the general election, they tend to try to soften their views or be a little more accommodating or focus on the sort of unifying aspects of their campaign as opposed to the more nitty-gritty details. And that's to try to appeal to the broader population of voters during the general election. So if you wanted to call them flip-floppers, maybe they are. But also, maybe it just means that they're responding to the electorate that comes to the different elections. So that's the primary and caucus sort of details there. So what we're going to talk about next is the different elements of political parties. Because although we tend to think of political parties as like one monolithic thing, the Republican Party, the Democratic Party, in reality, they're really broken up in a whole bunch of different ways. So let's begin by talking about the party in the electorate. That's you, by the way, and me, and all of us, actually. And the party in the electorate is perhaps the least disciplined of all the members of the party, because do you have to like pass a test in order to register or in order to call yourself a Republican or a Democrat? No, you don't. You don't have to pass a test. You don't have to like prove you're conservative enough or liberal enough. You just say, I think I'm a Republican or I think I'm a Democrat. And that means that we're likely to see the most diversity of opinion, and we're also likely to see members of the parties in the electorate, that's us, remember, as being less inclined to support sort of outright partisan ideas. Certainly there are members of the party in the electorate who they want the Republicans to win at all costs no matter what all the time, or they want the Democrats to win at all costs no matter what all the time. But more members of the party in the electorate are interested in things like compromise, or, well, I think they have a pretty good idea. I think I like what the other party says about this thing, those kinds of things. So the party in the electorate, of course, is doing the voting. And who are they voting for? Well, they're voting for candidates, right? And so those candidates go on to become the party in government. And I think I'm going out of order at this point, but that's okay. I'll just come back. So here's a look at our party in government. So party in government consists of those elected officials who represent the party at various levels of government. So here are our national party, the highest ranking members of the party in government. So the highest ranking Democrat is, of course, this guy. Don't hesitate. Who is it? Barack Obama. We had a little hesitation in 5th period. I was nervous. It's Barack Obama. All right. Then, of course, we have this House and Senate. Both the House and Senate are currently controlled by the Republican Party. So here we have this guy. His name is Mitch McConnell. He is the Senate Majority Leader. I'll write his name for you here. Mitch McConnell. So he's the Senate Majority Leader. And then the Senate Minority Leader is the guy just beneath him. His name is Harry Reid. And Harry Reid is the Senate Minority Leader, which makes him a member of what party? Good. And then the House Representatives, arguably the second most powerful man in Washington. That guy on the top right corner, his name is Paul Ryan. He is the Speaker of the House. That's right. He has an enormous amount of power. He is a Republican. And then leading the Democrats in the House is Nancy Pelosi. That's right. She actually used to be the Speaker of the House when the Democrats had the majority. She was the first female Speaker of the House ever in history, which sounds pretty cool to me. But she is currently the Democratic of the House Minority Leader. So these are the members of the party in government. And of course, what does the party in government do in exchange for the party in the electorate? Well, the party electorate puts in there, right? The party in government gets elected. So then what does the party in government try to do for the electorate? Yeah, they're going to try to pass policies that their people are going to like. Okay. But then it's not just the party in government and the party in the electorate, because we also have the party organization. But if you're writing this, you should probably put like a little parenthesis and an S. Because there is more than one party organization. So I'll go back to the picture then. There is, of course, a national party organization. If you see the letters DNC, that stands for Democratic National Committee, and RNC stands for Republican National Committee. So at the national level, we have party organization. But there's also the Republicans of Texas, the Democrats of Texas, so the Texas Democratic Party or the Texas Republican Party. And then there are parties in every community. We have the Brazos Valley Republicans and the Brazos Valley Democrats and so on. And each of those levels of party organization, as you can see on the screen here, each of those levels is going to have like appointed and elected officials. They're going to have policy papers. They're going to have their own idea about the things that are important to them. And so they're going to, of course, face a lot of decentralization problems, right? Just like federalism can be problematic because the states do one thing here and one thing over there, and we can be confused and they don't all agree and all this business. Well, the parties themselves have trouble sort of enforcing uniformity because, for example, the Republican Party of Texas is going to look and act a lot differently than the Republican Party of California, right? But they're supposed to be all under the umbrella of the RNC, the Republican National Committee. So there's that. So what does the party organization do for the people, the party and the electorate? Sure, so it's going to be trying to mobilize voters, encourage them to get out, inform them, raise awareness of various issues. And then what does the electorate have to do with the party organization? Well, they're not voting for the party organization. Yeah, they're going to be giving donations, sending in money. They're also going to be sharing ideas, right? So maybe I'm going to change that, right? Shaping the policy agenda. So remember, parties are a form of what kind of institution? Linkage institution, right? It's their job to figure out what the people want and translate that into policy. And the party organization is going to get lots of that information from the party and the electorate. But then the last piece of this triangle, of course, how does the party in government react or work with the party organization? Well, what does the party organization provide to the party in government? It provides a platform, right? It provides those policy alternatives. So it's going to give them this platform. And in exchange, the party in government is supposed to do what? Follow the policy or stay in line or hold everybody accountable or not make the party look terrible. All those kinds of things. I'm going to put accountability as my word here. Anyway, so we've got this sort of very diverse and sort of complicated system of trying to keep the party alive. So you can see that there's not really one such thing as the Democratic Party or the Republican Party. It kind of depends on what you're talking about, as it were. Okay, so here's a push part of this lesson. So what we need to know about for AP Gov is American political history. So what has happened over time to the American political system? So that chart is really confusing and hard to read. So we're going to do it over here together. So we're going to begin with understanding that during Washington's time in office, what parties did we have? Not yet. None, right? We had none. This is nonpartisan, sort of. Okay? But then shortly after Washington leaves, we're going to see one reigning party. They are the Federalists. But then in the election of 1800, you're going to want to know that. This is a realigning election. In the election of 1800, when Jefferson was elected, we see another party come to counter the Federalists. And that party was the Democratic Republicans. Yes, people call them Jeffersonians. So with the Federalists and the Democratic Republicans, and that lasts for a while, but not very long, because in 1812, something bad is going to happen to the Federalist Party. They support Great Britain, and then they win the war. So the Federalists are going to kind of die out. And so after 1812, we're going to have the era of good feelings, which is the only real time in our nation's history where there was only one major party. So in the era of good feelings, we had only the Democratic Republicans. Okay? But even that doesn't last very long, because by the 1830s, 1832 to be exact, Andrew Jackson is going to step onto the scene. And Jackson is going to sort of pull on this idea of this Democratic Party. And so he's going to form or solidify the idea of the Democrats as a party in and of themselves. The Democrats were all about laissez-faire at this point. And to oppose him, the people who hated Andrew Jackson's guts, because he was a little bit like Hillary Clinton and Donald Trump, and that everybody either loved him or hated him. So then to oppose him, we rise to second another party, which is the anti-Jackson. They're the Whigs. Give me Henry Clay. The Whigs then are going to become the party of big government. They want the government to get involved in the economy and to support it. But they don't last that long, because this thing called slavery suddenly becomes the biggest issue in national politics. And slavery is going to be sort of the death knell for the Whig Party. And so then in 1860, there's another realigning election. We're going to see a new party replace the Whigs. They are the Republicans. This is the party of Lincoln. And the Republicans are going to argue, they're going to kind of shift away from the ideas that the government should ignore the process of slavery, and they're going to begin to adopt a bit of a civil rights, as much as you can call it civil rights in the 1800s, which is not much, if we're being honest. But they're going to sort of adopt the idea of civil rights, and they're going to still be this idea of big government. They want the government to get involved. They want the government to direct the economy. They want the government to provide some support services. And the Democrats are going to continue as before. They have a little hiccup with the whole secession thing. But the Democrats will, of course, become associated with the South, and the Republicans will become associated with the North. And that lasts for a little while, maybe kind of a long while, until 1932. And in 1932, this is another realigning election. In 1932, this is the election of FDR. And in 1932, we're going to see a major shift, because what's going to happen is that the Democrats, not because of social issues, they're not really going to do much about social issues like civil rights, but because of economic issues, they're going to gather a whole lot of minority voters, especially African Americans. They're also going to gather farmers and union workers, city dwellers, and country people, and still the South. Basically everybody, except for the Republicans, are going to maintain control or maintain the support of big business. Okay, and that goes okay for a while. So the 1932 Democrats, this is maybe the biggest shift that we see, the one that's going to do the most to promote the policies of the Democratic Party of today. So the idea that we associate the Democratic Party with big government, that's brand new, right? So big government, Democrats, is really only going to come about in 1932, the New Deal in the Democratic Party and so on and so forth. That's a really big deal. But then I'm going to come up here, so if you have room on your paper, just keep going. But then in 1968, we see another realigning election. And this was the election of Richard Nixon. And Richard Nixon is going to employ something called the Southern Strategy, which is going to kind of cement the party idea or organization we have today. Because the South, if you were drawing, I would draw the South going like that. Because the South is going to be broken away from the Democratic Party and pulled into the Republican Party, as are social conservatives around the country. So social conservatives, Southerners, and of course still business. Meanwhile, the Democrats are going to maintain others. Yes. So this is sort of like that 1968 is the first time we can really begin to say that the parties in the United States look like they look like today, where we associate the South as Republican, and the Republican Party is all about like social conservatism and like laissez-faire stuff, and the Democrats are all about like big government and minority support and all of that business. You can see that it takes a long time for our current political alignments to develop. And in fact, we could see them shifting again. It's not going to happen in 2016, but if you had asked me 2 years ago what would happen in 2016, I would have suggested that probably we were going to see Latino voters moving towards the Republican Party, and then we were going to see the gender gap closing and more women voting Republican as well. It's not going to happen this year, y'all, but it's not soon. So there are still other shifts that will occur, and it happens as parties begin to adapt their philosophy based on feedback from the party in the electorate and the party in government, and what are those kinds of feasible things they can actually get done. So there's that. A question, what, 10 minutes? And so now we've got this era of divided government, which is really less about parties and more about like everyone was real mad at Richard Nixon. And so since 1968, it has been more common to have one party control the White House and the other party control at least one House of Congress than it is to see unified government where one party controls both. Barack Obama, for example, had only 2 years of unified government. So we had 2 years of a Democratic-controlled House and Senate, and then the Republicans took over the House, and then we had divided government, and had it ever since. George W. Bush had only 2 years, or excuse me, had 6 years worth of. No, I was right the first of all. I was wrong the first time. Had 4 years. So he had first 2 years of his presidency, the Democrats maintained control. And then beginning in 2002, President Bush enjoyed 4 years from 2002 to 2006. 4 years of Republican-controlled House and Senate, and then back to divided government. So, any questions about what divided government is?
What is that?
Southern Strategy.
Okay. Is that the Republican?
Well, that's what Nixon did to help bring the Southern and social conservative voters into the Republican Party. Whereas before, the issues had been primarily economic, right? Like the alignment in 1932 was really about the economy. But the Southern Strategy really introduced a lot of social issues into the party divide. Okay, so then what I want you to do is to take a few moments to jot down on your whiteboard a response to this part of the free response question. While you do that, I'm going to hand out your free response questions from the exam, and then we'll look at the rubric here together. while I finish up, here's a look at the rubric. All right, so hopefully everybody would have gotten the first point on this one for simply defining divided government. That's pretty straightforward. The second point came from somehow explaining how divided government could lead to distrust in the government. And the College Board up here on the rubric has given some examples. So they suggest that perhaps heightened partisanship, because now it's going to be us versus them, that might lead people to be frustrated about the government, feeling like it's too focused on, hurting the other party rather than like actually getting things done. That's again this idea of the decline of the middle or frustration. And then of course, the frustration and gridlock could also go together. If we have divided government, less gets done, we have more gridlock, and that can lead people to think that the system just isn't working, and people don't trust it to actually promote or to protect their needs. So those are some examples that you might use. But we're going to keep going now and look at this chart here about trends in party identification. So you'll notice that it begins in basically 1990, so the very end of the Reagan Revolution. I forgot to ask, would you show me how well you think you would have done when you got 1 point or 2 points for that one? Everybody should feel like at least 1. I'm waiting on 3 people to tell me how they think they did. Alright, so I'm glad that we're feeling confident about the definition. This is an example, that FRQ is an example of like a thing that we can't really teach, right? There's no like one right answer of here's how divided government does this thing. But it's understanding what divided government means and what we know about the political process, like what is the result of divided government, and then thinking about how that might contribute to mistrust. So that's one of those questions that I think sometimes throw students off just because you're used to just there being like a factually correct answer, and that's more of an explanation. Okay, so first of all, I want to draw your attention to the fact that inexplicably, mostly to irritate us, I think, the Democrats are yellow on this chart. Blue refers to independence, just for funsies. So would you take a glance at the chart and let me know what you think or what you've noticed along the way? So what's been going on? Well, what's happened to Republican voters? Yeah, decline over time. So from about, 32 or 33% to, it was 26% in 2010. It's probably up to about 30% now. So you can see there's been an increase since President Obama was elected. So the opposition to President Obama has encouraged more people to identify as Republican. How about Democrats? How are they doing? This is the yellow line. Yeah, I think they're probably about the same from beginning to end. So they've held relatively steady. They were increasing throughout the George Bush presidency, right? So again, typically when the alternative party is in office, the opposite party tends to get more numbers because basically anybody who opposes the president begins to feel drawn to the opposite party. But they've held fairly steady. And how about independents? Especially if we look since about 2000. Yeah, a fairly significant increase, right? And overall, a significant increase. So the number of independents has been up. Notice that independents were high in the early 90s and then have sort of come high again. Economic challenges can often do that, right? So when the economy is struggling, people tend to get frustrated with the existing parties. If we were to carry out these trends, and I could find a more updated chart, I think that we would see, and I think that what we would see is that currently the country is fairly evenly split split between Democrats, Republicans, and Independents. They each have somewhere around 30% of the country. But I want to make sure that we understand that independent voters doesn't mean nonpartisan voters. It doesn't even really mean moderates. It just means voters who choose not to identify with one party or the other. So they might still be very conservative or very liberal, but for whatever reason, not like or not want to self-identify as a member of that party. So two big takeaways, things that you'll want to know from this. The first of which is that the number of independents is on the rise. So you want to be able to describe the fact that we are getting more independents now than we have in the past. The second big thing that you want to know from this is, again, the population is fairly evenly split. Neither the Republicans or the Democrats can claim some huge gain on the other party. They both have about the same number of people in the country who identify with their party. So they can't really, neither of them can say that they represent the majority of the people, because it's just not accurate. So there's that. So the sort of last thing that I want to talk about today, and then we're going to do some review, is to look at the major characteristics of the various political parties, or the characteristics of the U.S. party system. And there are really a couple. And this is mostly review, but it might be useful to write it down to make sure you got this idea. So the first is fragmentation. Can you give me an example of why the party system is fragmented in the country right now, or in general? Something we talked about today.
Well, like the politicians that identify with the party don't necessarily have all their views lined up.
Okay, so the party in government is not necessarily going to follow in lockstep with the party in organization, and the party in the electorate is not disciplined. They don't force to do anything, and so we're going to see lots of challenges. And of course, the party organization itself doesn't have any national authority, and it has a lot of local authority, right? The parties at in each community and at the state level are going to have their own sort of discretion. So there's no centralized control over the parties. Another big thing that I think is questionable these days is that parties over time in U.S. history have tended towards moderation. They take, of course, two sides to an issue, but because parties want to capture as many of those independent voters as possible, they try to avoid extremism most of the time. Now, there are some exceptions, like during periods of conflict. So if there's a major social conflict, like we're having big social conflicts like with the Black Lives Matter movement, or a few years ago there was the Occupy Wall Street movement. So big social conflicts during the 60s and 70s, the Vietnam War protests, or a wartime like where our country is threatened. So during the World War II, or not really a war, but the Great Depression, where there seems to be some giant threat to the country. In those cases, we do tend to see the parties becoming more extreme on either side. But most of the time, parties tend to be as moderate as they can be without alienating their most extreme supporters, right? So they take sides. But remember that big political ideology compass that we put on the board? Remember that most people and parties in the U.S. are still fairly close to the middle. They take opposite quadrants, but they're still not that far away from one another. They seem far away because our whole spectrum is fairly narrow. But when we consider the extent to which views could become extreme, American parties tend to stay pretty close to the center. So there's that. So with 10 minutes, I think what we're going to do is do some review. So I'm going to have you put your notes away and put things away so we'll be ready to, so you can move and not to worry about the bell. But we're not done with class.